if I only show you 60% of my experience with pornography, then that is basically the only part that can be healed. The other 40% stays hidden. So 60% healing is great. Like, I'm not going to knock anybody who's willing to get 60% healing. That's fantastic. But I want to see everybody experience 100% healing. And so that vulnerability piece basically is saying, look, as much as you're willing to be seen and be open, that's how much of you can actually be healed. And it takes a lot of humility and it takes tons of safety in the environment. But when it is experienced, there's nothing like it. And that was huge for my recovery. And it's what we try to impart to all of our guys who go through our program.
What is going on, everybody? Guys, welcome back this week to another amazing, very important, very insightful, and very impactful episode of the Superhuman Life. As always, guys, I'm your host, Frank Rich. Just want to start off by saying how incredibly grateful and thankful I am to have you here with me today. You guys made a choice. You made a choice to click on this podcast, to consume this information. And I got to let you know, it means the absolute world to me. We've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now. We've seen some tremendous growth in this show. We've seen tremendous growth in the reach of this message. And I just want to let you guys know how much that truly means to me. I'm just a dummy with a microphone that likes to hear himself talk. You guys are what's driving this podcast right now. So whether it's the first time tuning in here or you've been with us since the beginning, thank you so much for what you're doing. And if you want to help us continue to grow, if you want to help us to continue to get this message out in front of more people, you can do that by making sure you leave us a 5-star rating and written review if you're getting value out of today's episode. But guys, we have a returning guest here. You know, as we hit the 100 episodes a couple months ago, I told you guys, we're gonna start bringing on some of our favorite guests, some of the most impactful episodes that we've had. And this gentleman was one of the most downloaded shows in 2021. So we got him back on today to dive deep into his brand new book, to talk about what he's doing with his coaching, to talk about how he's impacting the world and transforming men's lives. Yes, I'm talking about none other than Sathiya Sam, the founder of the Deep Clean Method to overcoming your issues and struggles with pornography, and also the author of the brand new book, The Last Relapse. So in the previous episode, which you guys need to make sure that you check out, which I'll drop down there in the show notes, we got into his story, to him finding freedom, to him overcoming his issues and struggles as a pastor, and really the identity issues that he was struggling with. And then we talked about some other successes that he was having. But today, guys, we really dive deep into the root cause of your porn addiction. Why do so many men struggle with this? And how can we get to the root of what it is? Because it's something you hear me talk about all the time. Your struggles with pornography is not about pornography. It's about you. So how can you get to the root of that? And what role does your identity play in finding freedom? What I really love about Sathiya as well is his program is rooted in proven success principles. Yes, there's a biblical component to it. It's rooted in addiction recovery and science. But many of the things that he shares is the same things that we talk about here at Rebuilt Recovery. These success principles, the ability to delay gratification, the ability to have consistency compounding over time. So we talked a lot about that. We talked about the need of a spiritual transformation in your recovery, and why if you do not experience this, the chances of lasting freedom are going to be difficult. And obviously, we get into his brand new book, The Last Relapse, which I want to make sure you guys go check out. There's a workbook, there's videos, there's modules to go along with it. So no matter where you are in your journey right now, we have tools and we have resources for you. But let's get into today's conversation, guys, with the return of Sathiya Sam, getting to the root cause of your relapse, getting to the root cause of your porn addiction, and making this relapse your last relapse. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you on the other side. Sathiya, my brother, welcome back to the Superhuman Life.
Thanks, Frank. Nice to be here, man.
Yeah, man. Really looking forward and grateful to have you back on here. You know, one thing we started to do right at the episode 100 mark is we started bringing back on, you know, some of our favorite guests from the first 50 to 60 episodes. So I know, you know, Rob Kowalski had Rob back on, and yeah, you're like the fifth or sixth person here that is returning, man. So grateful to have you back here, and I know we got some exciting things kind of in your world to share, and you know. At the end of the day, man, I love connecting with men that are on the same mission, and men that are spreading the awareness with porn recovery, and all these things. So yeah, really looking forward to kind of where today takes us, man.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And that's pretty elite company, man. I really look up to Rob, and I know some of the other guests you've had on here recently are some pretty heavy hitters, man. So this is cool. And I see what you've been up to as well. And I totally agree. Like, I think you and I know that, like, to help really change, I think, the narrative around porn recovery and how people, I think, realize how bad it is for them, but also like that there's hope. It's going to take an army, it's going to take an army to pull it off. So I'm glad we're both in this space and that we can kind of propagate the
Absolutely,
message.
man. And for me, it's coming up on 3 years. So February 14th, and I know I shared this on your podcast, and we might have talked about it before. So everything started for me from the podcast, rebuilt, recovery, my own story, right about 3 years ago. But I know for you, you found freedom like 7 years ago. So as you've been in this space now, and I know you really went all in on, your work and your practice and everything kind of last year, how have you kind of, seen the narrative change? We were talking about before we hit record, a couple of the bigger name people kind of out there kind of leading the front. You got your Lemkeys, you got your, your Hubermans. Seeing people of their stature talk about it openly on Rogan, on Mark Bell's podcast, I've seen a transition in just the last year and a half as far as at least the acceptance of the conversation. What's kind of been your take and perspective just with people opened to having the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was trying to get free, which that's going back like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, this subject was really taboo in general. And I think there was a very small percentage of churched people who acknowledged, yeah, we know porn's bad and we shouldn't have it in our lives and whatever. And they were actually talking about it. When I got free in 20, let me get the date. It's 2016, February 2016. And I think by that point, it was controversial. Like you would see articles on Psychology Today that were like, is porn really that bad? And there would be all these arguments for it and that kind of thing. And I think the scales were starting to tip, but they were still more or less balanced. And I think what's happening today is even if you tease apart the morality, I know you and I both kind of come from a faith perspective, but even if you were to put that aside, which is hard to do once it's in your life, but you can do it objectively. And if you just look at the research that's coming out now, you kind of look at our society, it's like, okay, there's actually so much more to this conversation than just, is porn right or wrong? It's just like, we're talking about people's well-being here. And of course, the surge of mental illness as well has a high correlation with compulsive behaviors and addictive substances and certainly addictive activities like watching porn. So I think I'm very grateful actually that the conversation is heading that way, because that was sort of always my prayer was like, God, if I'm not going to be the influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, then let the people who are out there with that audience already, let them be the ones who at least get the message so that the masses are starting to realize the detriments of porn.
Absolutely, man. And yeah, I mean, you touched on it there. A big part of my story has been, my faith, my acceptance of Christ in my life as, Lord and Savior. But I never try to come at it, at least when I'm invited onto another platform. I'm fortunate to kind of be connected, in the health and fitness space. And, it's been interesting because I've gone on some of these podcasts and some of these shows that have really more of a, personal development kind of business, health and fitness kind of audience. And it's always addressed like right at the beginning, oh, it's a taboo, it's a taboo subject. Like, nobody wants to talk about it. And like, that's the reason why we need to have it. Like, why does it need to be silent? Like, I think that in of itself reveals to us, but I never try to press the morality side down on anybody. If we want to go down that angle, we can address it from that lens, but let's put the research out there. Let's put the evidence from a scientific perspective. And then we all have free will. You make the decision if it's good for you. So that's been my approach that I've tried to take, and I know for you it's been somewhat the same as well.
Oh, very much the same. Yeah, and actually this year I've interviewed on more non-faith-based podcasts probably than ever before, and because I think people are curious. They're kind of like, okay, some people don't even know you could get addicted to porn because it's become such a just normal part of their lives that they just think, oh, this is just you just watch this casually. And I remember one podcast in particular. These guys, neither of them have any particular faith. And I was telling them about just the stats, the rising rates of erectile dysfunction, the rates of divorce when porn is involved, just some of the hard research that's coming out. And then you and I have a mutual friend, Joshua Broom. So telling about his story, and how miserable this guy was. And then like the human trafficking and like, there's so many facets to this apart from the morality. And they were literally speechless, like just completely stunned. And you could almost see them feeling the conviction about it, because they're like, we had no idea by watching this stuff casually, even what we're actually supporting or endorsing. And I think it just goes to show like the tide really is turning. I don't know if you get asked this on your podcast, Frank, but for me, people are always like, so what do you really think? Like, do you really think people are actually going to like agree that porn is bad and that one day it's going to change? Because virtual reality's coming and the metaverse, and Zucky's out with his agendas, and like, are we really going to see a change here? And I'm like, yeah, actually, I think we are. I think porn is going to be like smoking, where like at one point it was socially acceptable, normal, and it was like, woohoo, like let's do it. And I think people are going to realize, oh my gosh, this is like toxic, and we need to get rid of it.
Yeah, I've used that example a handful of times. Not only was smoking accepted, it was promoted and it was marketed and advertised.
Right.
I've pulled up a couple of different marketing pieces, in some of our content, like this specific cigarette is for like the pregnant mom. Like they were actually marketing tobacco products to women that had babies
crazy
in there. And then you actually go even further back into like the late 1800s. Like we all know the story of Coca-Cola. Like there were strains of cocaine in it from the beginning, and even some of the medicine that doctors were prescribing. Like you went into a doctor with a cough, like some of the cough drops had some of these like hardcore drugs, cocaine, heroin, and I mean at very, very small dosages. But yeah, I think I see things kind of the same way. I think what ends up happening is society, figures like yourself and me, and obviously some of the other bigger people, like they're going to start to kind of have the conversation first, and then the research in the medical field is going to kind of come behind it. And I know one thing that I've heard you talk about is the DSM-5, the fact that pornography addiction, and this is where a lot of like clinical people will attach to, oh, it's not in this big book, so it's not a real thing. Well, before things get in that big book, there needs to be research done. There needs to be other scenarios, and kind of talking about, what I was just saying with some of the figures. And I think hearing now that gaming addiction is something that is clinically recognized, I think it's just going to be a matter of time until pornography follows a trend there.
Yeah, and you said something really key, which is that it's actually the financial backing that's really slowed down a lot of the research, because people are like, oh, who cares about porn? Like there's bigger fish to fry, so to speak, and that narrative is changing. People are starting to realize its detriments, and it's interesting. I listen to a podcast called Psychiatry and Psychotherapy, and it's run by a guy named Dr. David Pewter. He's one of the world's leading psychiatrists, and he brings on experts who talk about all kinds of different fields. And one of them recently, she was actually a specialist in autism, but she was talking about how the DSM-5, for them to actually even publish the DSM-5, they went through all kinds of, there was tons of friction, a lot of disagreement at a high level about what should be in and what should be out. And she didn't talk specifically about porn addiction, but she said there were so many shortcomings with the DSM-5 that like, for her, even in the way she's diagnosing her patients with autism, she said it's very hard to rely on. And again, I'm not a medical professional. Like I'm not the person who really should be commenting on the accuracy of the DSM-5. But I think for me, it definitely makes me grateful that we're seeing things head in the right direction, man. And I personally think, my personal conviction is probably in the next 3 to 5 years, we're gonna see this thing take off like wildfire. And my prayer is that people like you, like just like can't keep up with the demand, because people are starting to realize, okay, I need this out of my life so that I don't mess things up for the next 10, 20 years of my life and of raising kids and the next generation, and all the kind of ripples that come from either having porn in your life or being free of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And I think it's important to also address it, from a spiritual side as well, understanding that there is a spiritual battle kind of taking place. You mentioned a couple things with, Joshua's story and kind of some of the behind the scenes within the industry. And then you brought up trafficking. And one thing that I've talked about a lot, because we've had 4 or 5 episodes specifically on, human trafficking. Here we are. This is being recorded at the end of January, Human Trafficking Awareness Month. We had our first actual survivor on this month sharing her entire story, which was absolutely incredible, which I want to make sure I mentioned to everybody out there. If you guys didn't, make sure to, after this episode, go back and listen to the first episode that was dropped in May of 2021 with Sathiya. But one thing I've said is, I believe the sex exploitation industry, when we look at pornography and trafficking, kind of combined, like, so sex exploitation is kind of the top of that kind of pyramid, I guess. It's one of the strongest forces of evil. So although we are saying that we're seeing a change, we're seeing a bigger acceptance, like I'm not one that actually thinks that in the next 3 to 5 years it's going to be gone. Like, yeah, there's going to be a lot more people working towards it, but I think that this is going to be a fight that, I mean, I don't know what your future plans are, but I think it's going to be something that I'm going to be fighting for a really, really long time, because there's a much bigger force driving some of these things.
Yeah, and what's got me really excited has been, I don't know if you follow Exodus Cry, and sex, what are they called? And sex
Yep.
exploitation. I forget exactly the name of that. Yeah, but some of these guys have made some major strides. Like you have like New York Times journalists that are exploiting some of the fallacies of these guys, and some major lawsuits now that are against MindGeek and some of those big parent companies of porn websites. So it's cool to see what's happening, because I think there's just more awareness, and people are sick and tired of it. And it's really cool because it's not just in this area. Like, we're seeing people rise up about racial injustice. And I'm based out of Canada, and I don't know if you've been following the news, but as we're recording there's like this huge revolt going on against the vaccine mandates and all that kind of stuff. And it's cool. It's cool to see people rising up and I think taking a stand. We have chosen this lane to run in, but there are other injustices, and I'm glad that as a society people are standing up, man. I think it's really cool, and it's fun to be part of the ride.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and that it's been really great to watch the freedom fight in Canada over these last couple of days. And I got a lot of friends, I got a lot of colleagues, mentors, associates that I work with that are up there, and just kind of beginning to maybe see a light at the end of the tunnel here. I mean, there's no telling where this is gonna lead, but it's great to see unity. It's great to see, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people all coming together, because for the last 2 years there's been such division around the world. I mean, and it's and this is way off topic of where I thought we were going to go today, but no, I'm right there with you. I mean, it's been really great and promising to see. So
I totally agree.
Well, let's dive in, man. I mean, obviously we touched on a lot more, your story, and we covered so many great topics here. I want to maybe kind of, spend today really, zeroing in on your work, on your coaching program. I know you got a new book, so I think that's kind of where I want to maybe take today's conversation. So I know your program is deep clean, and one of the things you say is you resolve the root issues of the pornography. It's a research based, obviously biblically backed as well. When you talk about root issues of porn addiction, I mean, in your work, in your practice, in your time in the trenches now, what are some of those root issues that men are struggling with that are leading them to get addicted to pornography?
Great question. It certainly is a bit unique to the individual, and we've sort of designed our system so that people are really identifying their specific root issues. But I would say a couple of the things that we see a lot are number one, feelings of not being good enough. And I shouldn't even just say feelings of it. It's actually believing. They fundamentally believe they're not good enough.
Would you say that's
fear
identity?
Of rejection isn't. Yeah, it is identity. Yeah. And I hope we can get to that. Our system kind of predicates on 3 pillars, one of which is identity. So I hope we'll get there. But to answer your question, I think, not feeling good enough. Fear of rejection is another big one. Kind of centers around that same thing. We also see a lot of guys that are caught up in performance thinking, performance belief systems, which is sort of the idea of like, I am what I do. And based on how well I do something, that's how valuable I am. So then porn becomes the outlet when you don't perform well, right? You're not feeling good about yourself. You're feeling low. So then you go and find that outlet or whatever. Disconnection, and I would say broken relationships is another big root issue. Not so much the existence of a disconnection, but the inability to manage it or to live with it or to respond in a healthy way. Like, my wife and I get into arguments. I would call that disconnection when we're arguing. But we have both built skills to actually talk through it, to confront it, to cope in a healthy way. But if you don't have that, the disconnection becomes a root issue, because you learn that anytime you're relating with people and you encounter difficulties, that you shut down or you run away, or maybe you go into fight mode and you make things worse, whatever it is. So that inability to navigate and manage relationships can be a huge root issue. So like I said, it depends from person to person, but generally it's boiling down to fundamental beliefs they have about themselves that are lies. They're completely untrue.
Wow. Yeah, that performance one, that really jumped out at me, because I mean, that in of itself, like, if you're attaching yourself to your performance, and then that's causing you to return back, and then once you get there, you're going to be obviously shame, like it's going to cause this massive, like, perpetual shame cycle. I mean, is that kind of where you see that leading to?
Yeah, exactly. So let me set it up a little bit. So identity is one of the pillars that we tackle in deep clean. It's actually the last one of the 3. And the pillars all come with a mantra. So for identity, the mantra is, I would rather be 100% my true self and rejected than 80% my true self and accepted. So we're teaching guys to really learn to embrace who they really are, even if it means risking rejection, risking misunderstanding, and whatever else it may be. We have a lot of titles in today's day in society. Like, if you look on Instagram or Facebook or a business card, it's like, I'm a porn recovery coach, I'm a husband, I'm a whatever. And when we start to slap these labels on us, again, I'm not against any of that. Like if all my profiles are optimized, like I totally get like labeling your stuff. But if we wear that actually internally as our identity, like this is who we are. If I don't, if I don't have my coaching practice, I'm nothing. If I go to that kind of thinking system, then the only way I feel valuable is if I perform well at work. And what it means is that my sense of self is a roller coaster. It's up one day, it's down the next. There's an unpredictability, and that's going to obviously affect the way I treat the people around me, and it's certainly going to affect the decisions I make and how I cope with some of the pains of those low kind of valleys of life. So what we teach guys is to actually find their identity in Christ, because when your identity is defined by relationship, let alone relationship with somebody who will not change their mind, then your value system is reliable. There's a stability to it. And it means that you can add on the other labels of being a coach and being a husband and being whatever else. But fundamentally, you're a son of the living God, and that actually determines your true value there. So that's kind of the whole essence of that identity part.
So that's one of the pillars. What are the other two?
All right, the first pillar is self-awareness. And the mantra for self-awareness is that if you are not aware, it cannot be repaired. So a lot of guys actually have everything is within them that they need to recover. But what I do and what you do as well, Frank, is we help them discover it, because there's things going on in them that they don't even know about because nobody's pointed it out to them, or they haven't received the guidance to actually build the awareness. So that first step is really identifying the parts that are contributing, the triggers, the environments, maybe the traumas from your past. It's trying to piece all of those things together and build an awareness, because once you are aware, then of course it can be repaired. The second pillar is healing. And that's the actual process of working through past traumas. Working through any parts of the past, any bitterness or resentment, unforgiveness you may have. There's a couple of different layers that we go through, but our mantra there is, he who is most vulnerable heals the quickest. And so we really push guys. Our program is an intensive, and we really push guys, like the deeper you dive into the vulnerability pool, so to speak, the faster your recovery is going to be. And it's really uncomfortable, but if it's done in a healthy and safe environment, then it's like kind of adding steroids to your recovery process. So between self-awareness, healing, and identity, all of those things wrapped up in a safe environment and regular coaching, we find to be really effective. And that's actually why I wrote the book. We tried to kind of instill the system into a resource that would be just a lot more accessible to the masses.
Now, when you talk about vulnerability, it's one of these words, from the personal development kind of self-help world. Like, it's in a way, like I kind of lost, I don't want to. It's become too buzzy.
Yeah,
it's become too buzzy,
right?
like in my opinion. So when you talk about vulnerability, how are you defining that? What are you meaning? What are you encouraging these guys to do? What does that process look like for you to get your men to become vulnerable?
Yeah, dude, I'm so on that bandwagon as well. I'm a little bit sick of the word. I just use it because people know what I'm talking about when I say it.
It's like people they're like, oh, I'm vulnerable because I'm a bad, like I made some mistakes, but then like, okay, what are you doing about it? Like, you're talking about these mistakes you made, but now take ownership, take responsibility for yourself. I mean, that's me, and I know my kind of flavor of coaching isn't for everybody. So I'm just curious, and I'm glad you kind of agreed with me. So anybody out there that is like promoting vulnerability, like I hope you don't feel like we're attacking you. We're just two people kind of sharing our thoughts here. So yeah, what do you mean when you're talking about vulnerability, and how do you kind of work and coach these guys to become vulnerable?
Yeah, so vulnerability for us is the choice to be seen. And that's really what it all boils down to. And the more what am I trying to say? The less reward or the less incentive you have, the more valuable the experience is. So let me give you an example. I went to ministry school, and the particular ministry school I went to really focused on that second pillar of our program, which is healing of the heart. And their idea was like, if you're going to be a ministry leader, we don't just want you to have the Bible knowledge and the skills to preach and whatever else. We want to make sure you're a healthy individual so that you're not the pastor who gets caught up in the scandal and the moral failure and whatever else. And it was one of my favorite things about the school. So they were teaching on vulnerability. And during the week, every day, actually, they would start by letting people come share stories, just stories about God, things that God was doing in their hearts, maybe areas where they were getting healing. It's a small group, like 60 people. So, it's a little bit safer to share more personal things if people feel comfortable. And we had a couple really cool stories one particular week of people who were just, coming out about some really deep, dark things that they had not really shared much before, but God was talking to them about it, and they were getting some healing, and they wanted to share it with the group. And like, it was the kind of community where like people are on their feet cheering and applauding, being like, yeah, man, you get it. Like, we got you. Like, that was awesome. And so on the last day of the week, just one random particular week where people are really sharing about it, we had somebody come up, and as soon as she started sharing, you just got this weird vibe where it was like, you're sharing something personal, but it doesn't really feel like you're being vulnerable. And she was kind of smiling through it. And there was just this weird thing. And you could kind of feel in the room, like when she stopped sharing, or when she was done sharing, rather, like we all like kind of clapped, but you could just tell people were like, that felt weird. Like that just felt a little bit different. And I think that's what I mean by the reward part. And again, I can't make assumptions about why she was doing it, but it certainly felt like the reason that person stepped up was actually not, it wasn't about being seen as much as it was about the reward of the applause and everything else. And so I think that really dilutes people's experience of vulnerability. It's why you and I are probably sick of hearing the word, because people are doing it on social media to get likes and to get clicks and whatever else, because vulnerability sells. But true vulnerability is the choice to be seen for the sake of being seen, or for the sake of being known. And so in our community, what that means is like, you might start by acknowledging that you watch porn, but like by the time you're coming to our program, which is all about healing from porn, like you telling us that you watch porn is not actually particularly vulnerable. Like what we're actually looking for is like, okay, what was going on? What were the feelings associated with it? You can tell us about what you were watching. Why were you watching it? What was the intrigue of it? What was porn offering you? We tried to kind of push that a little bit more. And that's what we mean when we say he who's the most vulnerable gets healed the quickest. The more you're open and transparent about those things, the more healing and freedom there is. And just to drive that home one step further, the reason that is because, Frank, if I only show you 60% of my experience with pornography, then that is basically the only part that can be healed. The other 40% stays hidden. So 60% healing is great. Like, I'm not going to knock anybody who's willing to get 60% healing. That's fantastic. But I want to see everybody experience 100% healing. And so that vulnerability piece basically is saying, look, as much as you're willing to be seen and be open, that's how much of you can actually be healed. And it takes a lot of humility, and it takes tons of safety in the environment. But when it is experienced, there's nothing like it. And that was huge for my recovery. And it's what we try to impart to all of our guys who go through our program.
I really love the way that you put all that together. I mean, I can obviously tell why you're having the success with helping men, because you've laid the foundation for everything you're doing. Now, is your program done is it a group intensive? Is it done in a one-on-one capacity? Is it kind of blend of both? So when these guys are opening up and conversing, are they doing it with other men that are in the program?
Yeah, so we do. We have a course basically. Okay. We do 4 months of group coaching, and then an online kind of private community. I do a bit of one-on-one with like athletes and some high-profile people, but generally speaking, it's the program with group coaching. And to be honest, that's where we see the best results anyway. Like even our one-on-one clients are part of our groups, because that's where this experience of vulnerability really is the most effective.
Yeah, we've noticed the same thing. In September, we launched groups for the first time. Because like I said, I'm kind of a baby in this whole thing. Like I've been coaching men and coaching people my entire life, but from the porn perspective, like I wanted to kind of get my bearings and kind of get an understanding of what I was doing. So at first I was only willing to take people on from a one-on-one capacity, because I needed to really kind of be in the weeds. But adding the group on added a whole nother layer, because one thing I've done is I've paired them up. So, you're part of a small group. I mean, we try to cap it at 10 in each individual group, but even within that, so we have a group of men that are all showing up weekly for our calls, but then inside of that, they each get a partner within the group that becomes their kind of go-to person. And what's been cool for me kind of being the coach within the group is every week when they show up these calls, like I'm hearing about conversations going on behind the scenes that I'm not having to even be involved in. It's like they're helping and coaching each other from a week-to-week perspective. So it's been really great. And I love seeing, you doing the same thing with the groups as well.
Yeah. I mean, we really encourage that as well. We have guys in our group right now who are doing a 30-day challenge to like have a 5-minute call with each other. They like pair up. They completely started this on their own initiative, but they're like chatting for 5 to 15 minutes every day for 30 days. And I think that's when we know our job is done, is when that community starts to develop. We actually tell people when you're finding, we call them a spotter, like that partner, like a spotter, the gym reference. And we say, when you find your spotter, find somebody that you could be friends with, or that you're already friends with. That doesn't have to be in the program for us. Because beyond the program, we want these relationships to continue. Because like, as much as it's great for them to do a 4-month intensive with us, like this is a long play. Like it's not about you just getting free, whether that takes 4 months or it takes a couple of years or whatever it is. This is about you staying free for the rest of your life. And those meaningful connections that you have, again, whether it's within the program or beyond, that seems to be the most effective, I think, for people to have longevity in the process. That's a great question. So I think we've tried a couple different things. Like I used to do lifetime, so it was just like you can come for whatever period of time you want. In theory, it sounds amazing. Like who doesn't want to have a lifetime product? Sound like it's great for the customer. Actually, it's terrible for the customer because there's no motivation to actually like have some kind of impetus. So we would have guys who would like do it for a bit and then they'd fall off because in the back of their head, they're like, oh, I can always come back later. And so it was like a procrastinator's dream, but an addict's nightmare, because we were actually perpetuating the problem. So 4 months seems to be the sweet spot where they're not dragging their feet, but they're also not rushing through it and just trying to check everything off. They're actually able to absorb the content, really apply it and internalize it. And it's actually affecting change internally, not just externally.
Yeah, no, it's just it's interesting because our program is 16 weeks as well, exactly 4 months.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So it was just really cool, and I think it's the same thing. It's saying like, yeah, if it was made it just a lifetime of coaching, like we're not actually working towards anything because you just have this kind of thing available. Like as a health and fitness coach, like prepping for a bodybuilding show, like you set a specific time frame. I got 16 weeks till this date, and having that goal in mind, understanding dopamine, it's the chemical that's dripped out in the pursuit of meaningful goals. We can really use the neuroscience in our program. So with you, what's the goal? Is it 16 weeks, like 100% porn free, or is a guy like, is he experiencing? I know your book is called The Last Relapse, but what's been kind of the what's the goal for you over the course of 16 weeks? Like no slips, no relapses, and then we send you out like creating this new life, or is it to provide you with the tools so once you're done through us, you can continue to navigate life on your own?
Yeah, we measure success internally first before externally. So we're not necessarily counting your streaks. We're not even saying like, okay, let's try to go 120 days here without porn or whatever the day count is. What we're actually trying to identify is what are those root issues like we were talking about earlier, and are we seeing progress there? Because that is what we call the lead measures. Those are the things that are actually going to indicate that you're recovering. The streak counting and all that, those are lag measures. So those are going to catch up later. But if we can teach our clients to focus on the internal parts, their inner development, their personal transformation, and them actually becoming the people God made them to be, their decision-making will eventually follow suit. So yeah, some people, they hit the ground running, they're good to go. And yes, they are not really watching while they're in a program. There's also internal development. Other guys do have a bit of the roller coaster experience. It's a bit unpredictable that way. But regardless, as long as they're transforming internally, we see that like 8 months, 9 months, 12 months down the road, guys are having tons of success and the momentum's carried the right way. And we do actually give an option for people to stick with the group coaching longer if they want for a monthly subscription. And we find most guys actually stay with us for about a year because they build meaningful relationships. They love the guys. They've really ingested the course content. And if they're connecting there, like, again, the connection part is really important for that longevity piece. So we're like, hey, if you're connecting here, stay connected, stay plugged in with us. That's totally fine. And eventually they reach a point where they're like, okay, we have enough momentum. I think we're good. And then they just, they carry on their own way.
Yeah. I love the way that you set this up. And it's very similar to what we've done as well. I mean, there's so much substance to the coaching and to the value. And you talked about this identity and becoming the man you were created to be. One thing you asked me when you had me on your show was kind of talk about some of the success stories and some of the transformations. If you can, maybe share, like a incredible story of inside your coaching program. Has there been any guy that's really stood out, has transformed from the inside out, and has gone on? I know you said you work with some high profile people, so maybe they're not the best example, but a guy that kind of came in and like maybe a little questioning about like, is this guy really got it? And then once he was in, like the dude just transformed and then gone on. Yeah. I mean, is anything powerful there from a transformation?
Yeah. One cool story just happened recently, actually. So this guy is a software engineer, and software engineers are some of the funniest people to work with in this space because we've all tried internet filters, right? Like a majority of people, probably 95% of the guys who come to me have tried internet filters, which the average person can get around. So it's always hilarious when you hear a software engineer talk about like, yeah, I tried internet filters and stuff. And it's like, you tried an internet filter? Why would obviously like you're going to get around an internet filter, And a lot of them are just very like obsessed with the technology. So anyways, this guy came, he was dating a girl, really liked her, a little bit later on, like I think late 30s. So, he was feeling the push. I mean, I think some people are in their 40s and they're not married and they're totally happy with it. He was feeling the push for whatever reason. So So they're dating, and basically his girlfriend says, if you want to marry me, then you have to get rid of porn, basically. Like, I just kind of refuse to go to the next level until I know this is at least being tackled, if not fully tackled. So he reaches out, joins the program, and we kind of hit the ground running. And for him, the biggest thing was actually what we were just talking about, performance thinking. So really having a hard time believing he was worthy of love if he fell short. And performance thinking is always followed by perfectionism. So if it's not perfect, it's not good enough. And that was true of his work, but because he was his work, because that's what a performance mindset is, it was also true of himself. That unless he did things perfectly, it wasn't good enough. So he was just his worst critic, and it was never good enough. He was super hard on himself, basically criticizing himself before he would even do something. And so he had become a shell of a man, really. Like, I mean, a very kind guy, but very soft and not able to stand up for himself, and just resorting to pornography because that was the only place he felt like he could breathe a little bit, and there was no risk of being rejected. So we start tackling it a little bit. We start working at it. And the big thing for him, which is typically the big thing in a lot of our clients, was the forgiveness piece. And when we got there, he said, you know what, Sathiya, like I'm a good Christian guy. I get forgiveness. I know that that's like the next lesson or whatever. And I'm really curious to see what comes up because I don't think I really need to go through this too much. And I was like, awesome, man. Like, just watch the video and like, let me know if anything comes up. And sure enough, he was like, dude, I have all kinds of bitterness and I didn't even know it, towards his parents. And he had some things happen in high school and there's just a bunch of things. And so, we walk people through this process of forgiveness. And he's starting to notice the difference. And today he was just in the group yesterday, and he was saying it's been 8 months since he watched. He and his girlfriend are now engaged, and they're ready. Like she feels confident in him now that like, okay, he's actually, one is that he's actually like made some progress here, but two is he's learned to be a lot more transparent with her, which is something she wasn't getting before. It just felt like he was hard to like actually breach. Like he was not a person. Like he would talk about the typical guy thing. Like we can talk so easily about the things we do. It's hard for us to talk about how it made us feel, or even just some of the I guess more emotive parts of it. And so she feels like she actually has a man in her life who's present emotionally, but is now leading with a lot more confidence as well. And those are the kinds of things that happen. I'm sure you see this with your guys too, Frank. But like when they actually start to recover and heal, there's almost always big life transition, whether it's like switching jobs, moving, a relationship change. And so we're seeing tons of that. Like the amount of like deep clean babies and marriages and all kinds of things that have come out the last year has been incredible. We've kind of lost count now, but it's been really fun.
I love that. And yeah, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, the businesses that have been birthed out of our program, we've had a handful of guys propose and, begin to kind of build their new life. I'm trying to think. I don't think we've had any rebuilt babies. That definitely gives me something. That definitely gives me something to work towards here in 2022. I want to circle back to this identity piece for a minute, because one of the things you said is, you help the guys uncover their identity in Christ. So does that mean that all men that are coming to you are Christian? Is it purely like, do you purely work with believers, or what happens if a guy approaches you and doesn't have that worldview?
Yeah. So, I mean, if a guy really wants to get free and he's willing to commit to a program, he can do deep clean. You don't have to be a believer. The nature of our messaging certainly attracts predominantly a Christian audience. But I think when you get to this identity piece, if somebody doesn't have that spiritual component, it's still teaching them that they're deserving of unconditional love. And all of the teachings in our course are unashamedly Christian, referencing scripture. We talk about the love of the Father and everything else. And what's really cool is when you talk about God as a father, it's a very relatable subject because every single person on planet Earth has a father. And I think people can always identify the broken parts of their relationship with their earthly father and imagine what would it be like to have had a perfect father. And so, of course, for Christians, we know that's God, and we know he is the perfect father. And being able to experience him is life-changing, when you really experience his perfect love for you. But the cool thing is that even if you don't believe in God, you can still at least work with some of those concepts and experience that kind of transformation of what it would be like to be fathered by somebody who perfectly loved you. And we have seen a lot of people who I shouldn't say a lot of people, but the handful of clients we've had who are not Christian have really warmed up to Christianity, especially when they reach that part of our program, because they're like, I've never heard of God in this way. God was always the tyrant taskmaster who was, watching every little mistake I made and always upset. And for them to understand God in that kind of light, I think is really impactful. So I think regardless, there's impact there, but of course, I think if you're a believer, there's especially some meaning there.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many parallels here in your program, the structure, the way that's set up, kind of your vision of how you're helping and working with these guys. Are you a fan, or are you familiar with Jordan Peterson at all?
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah,
So, obviously
absolutely.
Jordan, he's a reresearcher. He kind of cut his teeth, early on in his career as like an addiction researcher. And one of the things I've heard him kind of articulate and talk about, he's incredible to watch. He's on his own kind of spiritual journey, which if you guys are not out there and are not following this man right now, like get plugged in. I'm actually going to see him live here in a few days. He's coming to Tampa. But one of the things I've heard him say, and this is from his clinical research, is that all addiction recovery, he studied alcoholism. I think that's what he wrote his thesis on. All addiction recovery requires a spiritual transformation. And the way that he articulates this is it's a deeper sense of meaning in life. So, we have guys that come in, obviously, from a faith perspective, we talk about becoming the man that you were created to be. And in that, there's a presupposition that if you were created, that there's an ultimate creator. So although we don't specifically come at it from like we're a biblically based, but it's the same thing. There's scripture in every single week's study, but just the way that he articulated that. And as I kind of started to process and think about it, it's like, yeah, the men that do come, whether they're coming from a Christian background or they're coming from more of an agnostic, or I've even worked with other religions, like there comes that point. And I think that this is what we were talking about with marriages, with finding new jobs, starting new careers. Like they find that there's a deeper meaning for who they are and who they were created to be. And it's in that transformation that I see the identity change take place. Because we talk a lot about, changing your identity, becoming the man that no longer looks at pornography. And clearly what I'm saying there is you need to become a different person. So, I didn't really have a question there other than I just, I really agree with everything that you're saying. And maybe I'm just on a Jordan Peterson high right now.
No, that's good, man. That's really good. Yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson is a fellow Canadian, so I follow him closely. And we have friends at our church that are good friends with his wife, who I believe is a born again believer.
Michaela as
don't
well.
Quote me
No,
on that.
100. Actually, Tammy is. And it's due to her kind of bout with cancer last year. And Michaela, his daughter,
yes, okay,
has been openly like talking about she found God, and it's coming. Like Jordan is not far behind them. So.
Yeah, for sure. And he has tremendous value for the Bible and stuff. He did a great series on the Bible, on his podcast and all that kind of stuff. I think the other thing that I've heard in his messaging, maybe not overtly, but certainly implicitly, is spirituality is purpose, like we were just talking about, and it's also values. And it's a really cool thing about discovering yourself as you go through this addiction recovery process, because you start to identify what actually matters to you. And that's a really cool thing. It's deeply personal. You and I are both free of porn. We love God, and we're on a very similar mission. But the values that actually govern our day-to-day lives are probably not exactly the same. I imagine there would be some overlap if we really got into it. But there's going to be some things that are unique to us, and that really is completely apart from theology. It might be influenced by theology if that's part of your life. But if it's not, if you don't care about theology, you can still formulate values that are going to govern your decision making and really shape the person that you are becoming and the person you ultimately want to be. And I think there's a lot of lessons there for us, regardless of your faith stance, because when you don't have a value system, then why wouldn't you watch porn? Why wouldn't you engage in activity, even if you know it's going to harm other people and whatever, without a value system to really govern how you make decisions and how you treat the world and the people around you? Then why wouldn't you engage in that kind of toxic behavior? But as you start to discover that purpose, and then I think as you start to really refine those values, inevitably it's going to start to change the way you look at life and the decisions you're going to make as a result.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So well said. Let's pivot here. Let's get into the book, the last relapse. We're talking about like all the success you're having with Deep Clean. You got a podcast. I mean, you're out there creating content every single day. What was the motivation to take on a project as big as, I know writing a book is not an easy thing to do. I don't have a hard physical book. I've written a lot in my life. We're working on one right now, and I'm banging my head, man. It is not an easy process. So for you, with everything that you had going on, like what was the spark of motivation to write the book?
So I basically just got in touch with, 22, 23-year-old Sathiya, who was addicted to pornography and could not see a way out. And I remember those days. they were dark, man. It was really, it was a hopeless feeling. Every day just feeling like, okay, I don't want to watch porn today, but I actually have no idea what's actually going to happen because I had no control over my life and I had no control over the situation. And it was realizing that, what I was offering people was a very comprehensive and an intensive program that could really bring about change in their life. But when I thought about 22-year-old Sathiya, I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for that program. I wouldn't have done my own program. 24-year-old Sathiya, 25-year-old Sathiya, different story. But when I was 22, I wasn't there yet. And I think I realized that there was a gap that was missing sort of in the people we were reaching who maybe are ready. Like they're genuine and they're earnest in their desire to make a change, but they're not quite ready for the program yet. And I think one of the best things you and I can do as marketers for our program, our business, or whatever, is to try to give as much value away without too many barriers to entry. And for me, the book was probably the best way I could think of giving just our most effective tools, principles, and concepts into the hands of as many people as possible without it really costing a lot of money, without somebody necessarily have to put their hand up and say, yes, Sathiya, I'm addicted to porn. I need your help. We just tried to make it super easy because I know 22-year-old Sathiya in his hopeless and helpless state probably would have bought a book if he wasn't ready for the program. So that was really what we had in mind. We're trying to take the stuff that we know is impactful and make it readily available to the masses.
No, I love that. And that's, I'm same thing here. Like we obviously have, various programs, from, working one-on-one at a very high level with me to the group offering to the programs. But yeah, there's a lot of guys. I mean, I've had men in my program. Like I had an 18-year-old high school senior, like funded it himself. Like our programs, it's not expensive, but it's not cheap. It kind of falls in that, like, I feel like I'm putting value on the work that we're doing here. But he went out there, like he was working 2 jobs. He was doing some side hustles to pay for this all in of himself. And I mean, so we've gone from 18 up until I've had guys in my 60s, not in my 60s, but in their 60s inside of our program. But yeah, I love that because that's what I think about too. Every day when I turn the camera on and I'm shooting content, it's like, this is for Frank before. This is for the younger version of me. And that's where I try to create from. So yeah, the book is called The Last Relapse. And this may be a similar question to I asked you at the beginning of what are some of the root issues. But once a guy decides to quit, like he voices the commitment, like I'm committed to living a porn-free life. What have you seen are the causes for relapse?
Okay, it's probably a mixture of things. So one is consistency. And this is a really big subject in our space. I think the thing that I always hear guys say, and I've heard people say this as even maybe an objection to sign up for the program, is like, oh, I have a really hard time being consistent. And I'm like, bro, if that was true, you would not have an addiction. The whole premise of addiction is consistently engaging in a behavior. So we all, like, you have proven that actually you can be consistent. But what happens is for us to be consistent in new behaviors requires accountability and it requires a decent amount of persistence. And I think people lose that impetus. They think that the program is going to be like all rah after 3 weeks and they're going to be good to go. And then they maybe aren't seeing the results that they want to see. And so they're like, oh, maybe it's not for me or whatever else. So I think that's one of the biggest things that really hinders people's progress is the lies start to get in a little bit and maybe things aren't happening as quickly as they want. So they don't choose to be consistent. And I think the other thing that really stops people, to be honest, is they take in the information, but they really lack in the execution. And so we're actually restructuring some of our things in the next little bit here, because I would say I had probably made a bit of a mistake early on of just thinking, if I inform you enough, then eventually you'll be compelled to make the changes, not realizing, oh no, I have to do my job as a coach to really not just be like, hey, I think maybe you should consider this, but be like, bro, you need to do this. This is your next step. Do it before we talk the next time, that kind of thing. And really pushing people into action, because the only way you grow is really by taking massive action. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to feel totally confident in it. You just have to take a step, take that leap, and then take the next leap after that, and the next leap after that. And I think when people start to get scared, they start to logic themselves out of making decisions and doing things that are uncomfortable or unfamiliar. That's when we start to see people struggling a lot more and not really getting the results they want.
Yeah, I love that you touched on like the addiction to self-development, the addiction to personal growth. I shot an entire video on this. Like you're addicted to the concept of nofap. You're addicted to consuming these videos. You're watching them every single day, but then you're not actually doing anything with the information that that you're consuming. And I can speak on that because that was me for a really long time through my 20s and 30s. I mean, I'm sure you can see behind me, there's hundreds of books. I didn't actually start actioning on any of these things that I read until a couple of years ago, but I've been reading like a book a month since I was 18 years old. But why did I still have all these addictions in my life? Because I wasn't actually executing. Like I was getting the hit of learning. I was feeding myself dopamine because I feel like I'm learning, but I'm not changing anything from the inside. And I love your take on consistency there as well. Clearly you have consistent behaviors. That's what an addiction, it's what an addiction is.
That's okay, man. Yeah, it's a big deal. And I think this is why you're probably noticing that kind of additional transformation, Frank, in the group setting, because it's very hard. We always trick ourselves into thinking we can do it on our own. Because of course, if I can do it on my own, number one, it makes me look better. But number two, it's way easier. Like the degree of humility that it takes to reach out and say, Frank, I'm addicted and I actually need some help. That's a big pill to swallow for a guy. He's really got to swallow his pride. And on the flip side, when you actually do it and you have that community and you have the consistent coaching, then actually what you've done is you kind of put up, like, it's like bumper bowling. Like you've just ensured that you can never throw a gutter ball. Because if you do start to veer to the left or you start to veer to the right, you have somebody who's going to say, whoa, hold on. No. Let's get back on track. Maybe this is normally where you lose course, you lose a bit of steam. But you now have people who are supporting you, who are going to help you stay on track and really stay the course. And I think for guys who maybe have tried other programs, and you're kind of like, okay, guys like Frank and Sathiya, you have these great programs. That's awesome. But I've already done a program. That's great. I think my question would be like, did you execute? And number two, did you really have that support? Did you let people in enough to be supported to the degree that you needed it?
Where do you feel men maybe look at accountability? Maybe they look at coaching the wrong way. I coach guys inside of Rebuild Recovery. I still have a handful of fitness clients that I work with. And then I have this group of business people that I work with. So if people would see my Zoom log, it would drive most people nuts. The amount of time that I'm spending coaching people, but it's what I love. Like I'm a coach at heart. My identity is coach. I coach little league boys because I love to help. But I get this answer all the time. It's like, whether it's from the Rebuilt or from the business side, because they're not executing. And I'm like, how can I help you? And the response many times that I get, hold me more accountable. And it's like, you're not understanding this because I can only hold you accountable when you bring issues and problems to me. If you and I don't have conversation, you're not telling me the struggles, you're not telling me the challenges that you're facing, and you're only showing up to this call and not doing anything, then where am I going to insert any type of accountability? So in your work, in your practice, where have you seen there maybe a disconnect from people actually understanding what real accountability is?
Yeah, okay, that's such a good point, because I think a lot of people, how do I say this? A lot of people when they say, I need you to keep me more accountable, what they're really saying is, I need you to get on my case. I need you to get mad at me when I mess up. What they're actually looking for is an artificial consequence. And artificial consequences are always a symptom of irresponsibility. So let me give you an example. I had a client who came to me, and I had asked him before he signed up for the program, I had asked him, okay, what are some solutions you've tried? He's like, well, I actually had this system with my buddy where anytime we would watch porn, we had to give a donation to a charity that we did not agree with. So you're like, the logic of that kind of makes sense. There's an artificial consequence there that is going to stop me from doing the thing. But the problem is with artificial consequences, it is always somebody just outsourcing their responsibility. All they're doing is just saying, okay, instead of me actually digging in and figuring out why I'm doing this, I'm just going to try to put this thing that's going to make it really painful. I'm going to try to make this more painful than it is pleasurable to watch porn. And good luck with that. So when somebody says, can you keep me more accountable? They're doing the exact same thing. They're just outsourcing their responsibility in a really clever way. The only way you actually heal is by taking 100% ownership. 99% ownership is great. It's not going to get you free long term. You have to be meticulous in your ownership and taking responsibility, because if you don't, then there are going to be parts of your recovery journey that you will not be able to take any responsibility or authority for because you've outsourced them to somebody else. And you're going to remain powerless to actually change those parts of you that desperately need it for you to be free long term.
So what does that process look like though for a guy? Like, I mean, is it as easy as, reading Jocko Willink and understanding extreme ownership? Or if a guy is a perpetual, just getting rid of, like, not taking responsibility, is there a process that he can begin to work through to begin to develop responsibility? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we actually talk about this. It's the second chapter of the book. We have a principle stack, which is basically the foundation of our entire program. And the first two principles, the first one is control, the second is responsibility. But the idea is the next three principles are actually supposed to help you really take that ownership. So let me just go through them. So first one is control, second is responsibility. The third one is what we call the freedom bookends. And that is having a vision and having a why statement. And those two things are meant to drive you to actually take ownership of your life. So for me, when I was getting free of porn, I was thinking a lot about my future marriage. One of my mentors had taught me that marriage was a magnifier. And he said, if you think marriage is going to fix your problem, you're sorely mistaken. It's going to make it worse. So I believed him. And I said, okay, well, then in that case, my future marriage and my relationship with God, those are the two things that are driving me. And I think when a guy really has a vision that is actually compelling, what it does is it forces him to actually take some responsibility. That's usually the thing. It's like we're not motivated enough, or there's not enough impetus for us to actually own the thing. But when there's something you really want that's actually meaningful to you, I think it's going to drive you to make those decisions a lot more often. The why statement is kind of like a personal mission statement, and that goes far beyond your recovery. That if you really do that activity well with us, you might have a statement that could last you decades. But it's supposed to give you purpose and the real reason that you're pursuing it. And those are things that really keep you motivated on those tough days as well. The fourth principle is delayed gratification. And this is a really big one that we teach guys, because the reality is when you are watching porn, you're essentially choosing to not delay gratification. You're choosing the easy way out. And there's always a reason why, but sometimes people just don't see it for what it's worth. I talked about this story in the book. I was working with a client one time, and he was telling me that he really takes a lot of pride in his ability to solve IT problems. He wasn't actually an IT guy, but he's just like, I can always fix like internet issues and stuff pretty quickly. And he had this problem at his house and he couldn't figure it out. And after an hour, he was frustrated. And to cope with his frustration, he acted out. He watched porn and he masturbated. And so we're talking through it afterwards, and I was sort of asking him, okay, if you're in that situation again, what would you do? And he's like, well, I would probably, I don't know, like normally I would do something physical. That usually helps me deal with frustration. So I was like, okay, like what? Like you work out or go for a walk? He's like, well, I go for a walk. It's like, okay, so why didn't you go for a walk? He's like, well, I actually thought about it in that moment, but it was really cold outside. So I was like, okay, so would you rather put on your winter coat or watch pornography? And he was like, well, I never really thought of it that way. So I think sometimes people don't realize what they're choosing between, because porn is just at the forefront of their brain in those moments of temptation. So really getting granular about what's at stake here in those moments can be really helpful. And then the last thing, and we've already talked about this, so I'm not going to elaborate on it, but the last part of that principle stack is that consistency compounds. And so again, it's why if you're not consistent, you're going to start to, or you're not going to get the results you want, because you haven't gone long enough to actually get that compounding effect. Like Frank, you really inspire me because you've been putting out content daily for like a long time now. And I'm sure you were seeing steady results, but lately you've seen like a dramatic uptick, right? And that kind of compounding effect, if you would have given up after the first couple months or the first year that you were doing this, it would have been like, well, at least I gave it a shot. But that consistency is now compounded and it's caught up with you. So anyways, those 5 principles, I think collectively really help people to not just understand that they need to take responsibility at a cerebral level, but actually practically in their day-to-day life, ensuring they're actually carrying it out.
Dude, if you knew how many times I sat here and contemplated just throwing it all in and just being like, why am I even, I had like an existential
100%.
crisis like last week, like to the point where I sat here and I'm like, I'm just going to pull it all down. Like literally 500 videos and 110 podcasts. I'm just going to wipe it off. Like, and I'm so glad I didn't, but I'm a big fan of, I actually shot a video this week on delayed gratification. I'm a huge fan of the marshmallow study out of Stanford. Something about Stanford and research. Like I'm attached to them over there. But it's, it's the number one indicator of success in anything is the ability to delay gratification. That's what I love about the work that you're doing here is it's obviously it's layered in biblical backing. It's layered in addiction recovery, but you're really working through proven success principles. I mean, consistency compound as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. That's something that I talk and teach all of our students. And then the delayed gratification piece as well. What can people expect in the book? I mean, is it something you're going to sit down and consume and read, and it's walking you through stories? Is it a handbook, workbook with like exercises at the end of each chapter? Yeah, talk a little bit more about the book, and then tell people where they can find it. Because I know at the dropping of this episode, it just launched a couple days ago.
Yeah. So we know that I think in today's day and age, a lot of people are learning through video, through audio, and that kind of way. So the book is, it's worth mentioning. The book is available in audio format as well, audiobook on, just your regular platforms. I think what people can expect through the book is an experience and hope. Those are the two things we were really trying to incite in the readers or the listeners. So what I mean by an experience is we really tried to make sure we're not just giving you our best information, although we are doing that, but it comes with a free workbook that you can get online. And any single person who buys the book, you get the workbook automatically. And that, I think that is a really helpful way for you to apply what you're learning, to do a little bit of internal reflecting and being like, okay, am I actually living this out? What are some of the areas that maybe I need to make some adjustments and some improvements? So there's a workbook. There's also a master class that comes with it, and that's for people who are more visual. So you get some video teachings that basically focus on some of the main pillars that we talked about today and principles. And it's a very nice complement to the book. So as you're, listening to it or reading it, you also have the video content to just drive it home a little bit. And I think the last thing that people can really expect is something that is comprehensive. There's resources out there that really focus on one part. I think of Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted, and he talks, I would say, a lot about the origin story and kind of healing the inner child. There's other people who really focus on, I think, the neuroscience aspect of this. And we were talking about, I'm forgetting her name now, but the Dopamine Nation,
Lemke, Anna Lemke.
Yeah. And so the neuroscience part of it. And what we tried to do, and this has always been our approach, is trying to merge all of these elements together. The clinical, more emotive, therapeutic side of it, the research, neuroscience component, but then as well the spiritual part of it. I pastored for 10 years and trying to integrate all of those things. And that's what I mean when I say it's going to be an experience. You're going to get a little bit of everything. But you're also going to get guided through it. You're going to get a chance to really apply it on a personal level. And we've woven stories throughout the book. And we did that for two reasons. Number one is we talked a lot about the depravity of people's situations. Because when I was struggling, I felt like I was the only one. And I was like, sure, there's other people struggling out there, but they're not struggling with maybe the things I was attracted to or the frequency or whatever. And we tried to give a variety of stories to show, look, like there's nothing new under the sun here. Like we've seen a little bit of everything, but look, all of these people figured it out. They found a way to get free, and so if they can do it, you can too. And that's what we're really hoping people walk away with when they get the book.
Yeah, guys, get out there. If you're hearing this and this is resonating with you, and you're looking to explore this, obviously, yeah, we have courses, we have books, we have programs, but I don't believe that I have it all figured out, and I'm not the only person that can help. I definitely, just based upon this conversation, there's so many parallels in everything that we're talking about, everything that we're teaching. So, guys, go out there and find it. Where is it on Amazon? Is there a specific URL? Where can they pick the book up with all the bonuses and everything?
Yeah. So it's called The Last Relapse. It's available on all major platforms. For you to get the masterclass, you have to go to our website. But otherwise, just by buying the book, like I said, within the book, we teach our readers how to get access to the workbook and some of the other supplementary materials. So yeah, The Last Relapse, it's on all major platforms.
And then the masterclass and everything is available at sathiyasam.com. Is that where they would find that?
Okay. That's right. Exactly.
Amazing, brother. Well, we had you on before, and obviously we ended, with our final question there. So I think I want to maybe take it a little bit different angle here as we close out today. But what's, so obviously the book is coming out here. What's the rest of 2022 looking like? Anything up and coming, anything exciting? Like what does this year look like for Sathiya, for the Unleash the New Man, for Deep Clean, and everything you got going on? And then we'll see where we can end this. I got an idea of what I want to ask you, but we'll just see how this comes home to a close here.
Yeah, sure, man. So I'm actually living in Jamaica right now. We moved here for the winter. So I have a bit of an interesting year. I'll move back to Canada at some point and just kind of get our feet settled again. Last year, we really worked on resourcing people. And so that was the daily podcast, the weekly newsletter, and then the book. I think this year, it's kind of like, okay, now that we have the resources, how do we try to really spread the word? Get them into as many hands as possible. Like I said, I've been interviewing on more secular platforms as well, really just trying to raise awareness and just get people to think about the subject a little bit more intently. So this year, like spread is sort of our MO. And that's kind of our main mission. I think there's tons of people who are starting to latch on, but there's a lot more who still don't know how much help is actually available for them. And we're trying to inspire hope in those people. So that's kind of where our aim is this year.
Yeah, love that. Guys, we'll get all of Sathiya's URLs, his Instagram, his podcast, the book pages. They'll be dropped down in the show notes there and then in the description here on YouTube. One thing I was really I was really shocked when you interviewed me on your podcast and your ability to bring out things in my story that I hadn't shared anywhere else. Like there were probably 3 to 4 specific things that I shared with you that I hadn't openly talked about in any of my solo content, or I hadn't even been asked, or I'd gotten to the point where I shared it. So I'm curious with you, you create a ton of content. You're getting interviewed all the time. Is there one thing that maybe you haven't shared either here today in the first episode or on any of your other podcasts that you've been on, a piece that's been fundamental to your success, both in your recovery, but then obviously in the success that you've had? So I know it's kind of a great question, but is there something that maybe like you haven't talked about here that could be valuable for the listeners here? If not, just end it and however you want to end it. But I'm just kind of curious because you were able to extract so much out of me.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. That's really kind. I appreciate those words. Yeah. So you're putting me on the spot here, but it's a really good question. One thing that comes to mind actually that we didn't even talk about this in the course, and I kind of wish I would have in hindsight. But something that's been really helpful for me is Sabbath. And the main reason is because I work hard. Like I have a very high work ethic. I always have, whether it's athletics, academics, or in this case, business. Like I just work super hard, and I would be the guy who would just burn myself to the ground if I wasn't careful. And the interesting thing is I've kind of adopted this new mantra that we're slowly just like, I'm testing it out on my community a little bit right now, but it's work hard, rest hard. Because, when I was studying to be a doctor originally, it was work hard, play hard, right? So you'd had all these med school students who were like just brilliant, right? And would study 16 hours a day, and then they would just get hammered on the weekends, and they do hard drugs, and like they had to find some way to cope, and it never really added up to me. So something I don't talk about a lot is I'm a huge believer in rest and really taking care of yourself that way. But what people might be surprised, especially people who know me and know how intense I can be about my work, is like when I Sabbath, bro, like I don't get out of my pajamas. Like I will eat the biggest, fattest stack of pancakes and like put all the maple syrup on it like a good Canadian boy, like just without apology, like just really giving myself the space to just breathe, to rest. I'll go for walks and that kind of thing. And it's been really useful. I would say it's been useful even for my recovery, just my own well-being long-term, because when you're free for 6 years, like the things that you do to keep you free are much more about self-care than they are about avoiding sexual misbehavior. And so if it's going to be good for me, I know it'll be good for me continuing to stay free, but it's also really good for my relationships, with my wife. She like Sabbath is her favorite day of the week because we just get all that time together. She knows that I'm like focused on her. I'm just kind of dialed in. And I think that would be some of the secret sauce for sure for being able to kind of create content and just keep stamina is like, you do have to give yourself those spaces to breathe. If I could just drive it home and kind of tie it all together, it's also why if you do relapse while you're recovering, it's not the end of the world. Because sometimes what happens for people is, if you think about it, you've been doing something the same way for, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So for you to make a dramatic change might actually be a little bit too much for your body. Your body may not be able to cope. So it's actually okay if you're kind of doing it gradually. We always say as long as the trend line is going in the right direction, then you're pretty much good to go. But if you relapse every once in a while, it's actually because your brain is probably looking for the rest. It's looking for that relief, and it's just used to finding it there. And I think as you start to heal more, you can flip that on its head a little bit and have things like a Sabbath or other things that are going to be restful and rejuvenating for you, and they'll be really helpful for your long run.
Dude, I'm so glad I asked that question because I needed to hear that because I told you, I mentioned it briefly in the podcast somewhere, like I had this crisis this past weekend. And what I realized when I got to the root of it after talking through it with a couple people is, told you like the podcast has seen tremendous growth here in the last 3 months. I mean, it's 10, 15% per week over week. And I think I got away from a principle that I believe to be true and hold very strongly, and it's that consistency compounds. So instead of just keeping everything consistent that we were doing, I started to get the excitement of seeing this new growth. And I think what I did is like, let me just pour all the gasoline on the fire right now. And I started to stretch myself really, 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 really thin. I mean, I'm talking 7 days per week of 14 to 16 hour work days. And it got to a point where, this has been 3.5, 4 weeks now into the new year, where I literally sat here like last Friday, like dead, like completely just drained to the point where it's like I hadn't been taking care of myself. I always use this cup analogy. We have to fill our cup up. So then we go out into the world, we have something to pour from. And that's what I was getting with what you're saying. It's like, we need the Sabbath. We need this day of rest so that we can then go back out into the world and be a man of service, be a man that is doing good for others, whether you're a coach or whether you're just working through your own struggles in own recovery. So great way to end that. Incredible way to end today's conversation,
that's
man.
cool,
Thank
man.
you.
That's cool. And I was actually going to say, I really learned something from my interview with you, because you had talked about fasting, how you fast 24 hours a week. And I've done that for a couple of years as well, but I was doing it midweek, like right in like usually some of the busiest days of my week. And you talked about how you do it on the weekends. Usually you fast on Sundays, and like the dots just connected during that interview, and I've been doing it since, and it's been really helpful, man. So I learned a ton from you in that interview as well.
I love it, brother. Cool. I love it, man. We'll keep doing what you're doing, man. Excited to get this book out there. Be completely honest, I haven't even opened up the copy that you sent to me. I'm a hard book guy, man. So I'm gonna pick it up, next week when it's launched. But guys out there, hopefully today, spoke to you. We got into some real important, pieces of recovery here. So grateful for you once again, man. Obviously, I want to continue to support and everything that you're doing. If there's anything that we can do, to help get this out there, obviously I'm going to connect you with a couple of individuals. But guys, check out the book, follow Sathiya, check out the Unleash the New Man podcast, get plugged into them. We'll drop all that information down there. And if you want to continue to help us, we've talked about it here a couple of times, like we're really seeing some tremendous growth. And it's because of you guys out there. I'm just a dummy with a microphone that likes to hear his voice talk. You guys are what's really making this grow. So we appreciate it, you guys. If you wanted to continue to help us more, probably the most important thing you can do, if there's a guy in your life that maybe needs to hear this conversation, do us a favor, but do them the blessing of sharing this conversation. But if you're getting value out of these conversations and you haven't done so yet, make sure to head over to Apple or Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating and written review. But for Sathiya Sam, The Last Relapse, Deep Clean, Frank Rich, we love you guys, and we'll see you next week.